Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Sei-wan, professor of economics at Ewha Womans University. Professor Kim, thank you as always for making time today.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, let's start with Wall Street, where we saw a rebound on Tuesday. Bond yields came down, which helped. Retailers like Target and Walmart, though, their shares were down because of costs eating into their margins. For the S&P and the Nasdaq, gains of more than 0.9%. What's the story in the global markets?
U.S. stock indexes climbed in a volatile session Tuesday as investors continued to assess the outlook for inflation and economic growth. The S&P 500 rose 1%, driven by gains in 10 out of 11 sectors in S&P 500. The Nasdaq Composite climbed 0.9%, and Dow Jones Industrial increased 0.8%. U.S. Stocks have swung in recent days, much affected by a shift in views about the strength of the economy and the likely path for the central banks and interest rates. A big concern is that central banks could act too aggressively as they combat inflation and trigger a slowdown in economic growth, even a recession. The yield on benchmark 10-year Treasury note is to 2.9% level from 3.0% level on Monday. In Asia, major benchmarks were all advanced today. A Shanghai Composite Index gained 0.7%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index added 2.3%. Japan's Nikkei edged up 1%.
Well, Korean stocks today were higher early in the session, everything depending on the Fed and the inflation numbers coming out later this week, as you mentioned. But those gains in Korea were gone by the end of the session. A real mix among the big names. Shares of KakaoPay were down in the double digits. Tell us about the domestic market.
Today, the benchmark Kospi marginally dropped 0.01% after yesterday's drop by 1.7%. However, Nasdaq gained 0.1% today. U.S. markets moving up yesterday did not give a positive impact on domestic market, as World Bank cuts its global economic growth forecast for this year from 4.1% down to 2.9%. Actually, Kospi market has stayed in the positive daily return almost until the end of session today. But foreign investors' huge sales in the last minutes moved Kospi to negative returns. In Kospi market, foreign investors net sold 106 billion won today. However, large capital stocks are mixed today. Samsung Electronics dropped 0.3%, and the second largest cap, LG Energy Solution, also dropped 1.5% today. But SK Hynix gained 1.9%, and Samsung Bio also gained 0.7% today.
Well, Professor, oil prices, they're back up in part because of the end of lockdowns in Shanghai, which will restore demand. Goldman Sachs, though, is one that's saying oil will reach $140 a barrel this summer. That would mean even higher fuel prices. What's happening with oil? What's your outlook?
According to Goldman Sachs oil market report, which is kind of influential in Wall Street, United States, high oil and gas prices will need to rise even higher this summer to give more incentive to the new production and discourage consumption. They are now forecasting Brent crude oil prices will average $140 a barrel between July and September of this year. Brent is currently trading at about $120 a barrel. Even worse, Goldman Sachs said summer retail gas prices are going to need to spike to levels normally associated with $160 per barrel. Goldman Sachs calls for Brent oil to average $135 a barrel during the second half of this year and first half of next year. So to summarize Goldman Sachs' report, the higher crude oil price, which is the main driving force of global super high inflation, won't be controlled until early next year.
Well, Professor, finally, data shows South Korea's household debt in the first quarter came down, actually, but it still exceeded GDP. And in fact, it's the only major economy where that was the case. Debt owed by companies grew at the second fastest pace in the world. What do you make of the debt situation?
Well, according to Institute of International Finance report, which is released on Monday, Korean household debt situation is one of the worst among the 35 advanced countries. According to the report, Korea has the highest household debt to GDP ratio among 36 major economies in the first quarter of this year. Korea's household debt to GDP ratio came to 104.3% in January-March period of this year, followed by Lebanon, Hong Kong, Thailand, and UK. Korea was the only country whose household debt exceeded its GDP among the 36 countries that include Japan, China, U.S., and European Union countries. Korea's outstanding household lending stood at 1,752.7 trillion won at the end of March, down 1.5 trillion won from the end of last year. So household debt to GDP ratios have been on the decline in global economies mainly due to the rising interest rate. Korea's ratio fell 0.7 percentage point from 105% in the same quarter of last year.
All right, got it, Professor. We'll have to leave it there for today, though. Thank you, as always, for coming on, sharing your insights with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Devin.